Welcome back to the show after a little month-long break. We are coming back with a returning guest, Troy Valencia. So if you're not familiar with Troy, he does a lot of things. He's an author, a dad, a co-founder of an Iboga retreat center called Root and Wisdom, as well as a nonprofit called Sacred Root Foundation. I would call him a spiritual mentor. He does coaching. He's at the tail end of his doctorate degree in clinical psychology. He's just got a lot of perspectives to give. And so on this show, we talk about his most recent book, Living Beyond the Mind: The End of Personal Suffering. Through Troy's life experiences and studies, he realized that not only was suffering optional, but it was a product of the mind. In this book, he blends modern psychology, indigenous wisdom, Eastern philosophy, and direct spiritual insight to help his reader break free from suffering at its root. So in a lot of ways, this interview is a continuation of Troy's last interview with me, episode 59, Whispers of Liberation from Suffering. So if you want more on this topic, be sure to look into the show notes to find that interview. So let's get into the highlights. He shares about an initiation experience in Africa with the Bwiti tradition that sparked the beginning of this book. The ways in which psychology often falls short when it comes to helping people integrate spiritual experiences, brushing them off as depression or a psychosis, mental illness, and how integrating indigenous wisdom may be the key to rewrite such a disempowering narrative. We get into various practices and principles such as mind transcendence and the middle way. And then Troy shares his perspective on parenting rooted in spiritual awareness. All right, that's it from me. If you would like to look into working with Troy and purchasing his book, you can find all of that information in the show notes. And I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephanie. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. Troy, welcome back to the show.
My friend, how are you?
I am perfect. Living the dream. So we're talking about a really big concept, a really big book that in a very short amount of time, I mean, just you in my life in a short amount of time has helped change everything. And this book is just an extension of that. So thank you for putting it out in the world. It's so there's so much to it, and the whole time I was thinking, where did he even know to begin? So I'd actually would like to start with that. Is how did this seed of a book come to you, and how did you just like where did you begin with it?
Yeah, I guess first of all, just thank you for the continued work that you're doing. Um, it's just really beautiful to see you, yeah, just grow in the ways you have in the journey of remembering. So I just want to first honor you for that,
Thank
as
you.
always, my friend. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you're gonna find out pretty soon when you go to Africa, how this sort of started for me. But yeah, for me, I had the education in East-West psychology. I got that master's from California Institute of Integral Studies, and I had read all the Eastern philosophies and all that kind of stuff for years. But it was during my initiation in Africa and into the Bwiti tradition where I was awake for 5 days and went into that state of psychosis, is what really changed everything for me. Without going into too much detail about that journey, I guess that could be a conversation for another time, I suppose. But the best way I can explain it, and I talk about this in the book, is imagine if every day you woke up in the morning and you had a pair of sunglasses on. So all you know is the world through this tinted lens. And then you fall asleep one night, just like every other, and you wake up and one of the lenses is removed. What would happen now is you would still see the world through the tinted lens, but you would see the world without it. That tinted lens is the mind, and without it is beyond the mind, or as the book's titled, Living Beyond the Mind. And so after my initiation in Africa, where I was awake for 5 days, went into a full state of psychosis, which that psychosis, quote unquote, lasted in my reality 17 years. I lived a 17-year life inside of that place, which was only 5 days of Earth time. When I came out, one of those lenses was removed. And so I started seeing the world through this understanding of living beyond the mind. I started seeing the mind in everything. I saw how it colored my perception, how it influenced my speech, how it influenced my vocabulary. And so, although the genesis of the book was my life, that was the single catalyst that allowed me to articulate the writings inside of the book
Did you realize it right away what was happening?
right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you spend so long, we talk about this being the observer, right? And Eastern philosophy talks about I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. And that's one thing to read that and have an intellectual understanding. But I spent in this realm years as that, watching this other life unfold. I mean, it was a 17-year life. I was getting on airplanes and like going to work. It was a whole thing. But as all that was happening, the witness, the seer, you could say, was in the back watching this sort of unfold the entire time. And so you spend long enough in a place you couldn't possibly ever forget. It's just something you remember. It's like working on the alphabet every single day. You know the alphabet because you practice it so much. You spend so much time studying it. You're not going to forget the alphabet anymore. And so when you spend so much time as the witness, as the observer, as I did in that state, due to the gift of Iboga, which is what it was, I couldn't possibly forget. So when I woke up, it was just a new, complete awareness I had.
There's something that you said there that triggered a question. Oh, yeah. Actually, I think that's something I totally overlooked with my notes here. So throwing the notes away. I loved
Mhm.
how you talk about mental illness and from this experience of realizing what it actually is. So I mean, your perspective for me feels so true. So it feels like truth for me. So I would love for you to share, yeah, that insight that you gained on mental illness.
Yeah, so if you want to read this for yourself, there's an article, if you Google, it's called What a Shaman Sees in a Mental Health Hospital, or a psych ward. And it's written by a man named Malidoma Somé. He was a true shaman from Burkina Faso. It's one of the most highly regarded spiritual places in all of Africa. And he took a trip to the States and went into the mental health hospitals and recounted in this article about what he saw. And what he said was that the majority of these people, there wasn't any mental health issue. There was a spiritual emergency happening. And the psychopharmacological medications we're putting people on were suppressing that. And the spirits were actually trying to remove the effects of these medications in order to help the people, to help them wake up. Um, and I think there's a really cool story, which I'll share, that might sort of articulate this best. And it's actually from Carl Jung, which I'm sure you've heard of Jung. For anyone that doesn't know, Jung is the pioneer of the collective unconscious. This idea, he was sort of, you could say, attached to the hip at Freud for a long time, then branched off on his own. But when Jung was doing his postdoc, he was at the University of Zurich with Ergen Boiler, and he was assigned to this case of this woman who's in a catatonic state. Catatonic state basically means you don't do anything. You just lay there. There's no response. You can't talk to them. You can't do anything with them. And so Young got assigned to this woman's case, and no one had ever been able to work with her. And he just sort of sat in the room every day. He never engaged with her, never tried to, and just read and wrote. and kept her company every day, going on and on for months. And one day out of nowhere, this woman pops up and she says, I lived on the moon. And Young, as casual as he could be, as we're talking now, he says, the moon, why don't you tell me about that? And she goes on to explain that she's living on this fortress on the moon. And what she does every day is watch over the earth, scanning it. And she helps women sense some signs before they get in trouble, especially in cases of like sexual assault. For context, this woman was raped by her brother and her brother's friends at a party. They got her drunk, and she was raped by a lot of men. And after that, she sort of severed from her own psyche. And Young just entertained this woman and talked with her. And at one point, casually said something to her along the lines of, you can't stay up there anymore. You have to come back. You've already started to make contact with this realm. And after time, this woman ended up making a full recovery, even having a family, and Young followed her for years and years and years. And so I share this because mental health, um, for a lot of people, is the awakening of the spirit within oneself. And that's going to have a tremendous effect on the psyche. The problem is in the West, we don't know how to hold that. All we know how to do is medicate that. Am I saying that anxiety and depression and PTSD aren't real? Absolutely not. Of course, they're real. But I'd be curious to know how many of these people who we've kept medicated for years and years and years, and in cases like schizophrenia, how many of them are actually quote unquote crazy or cuckoo, to use a more loose term? And how many of them are actually truly speaking with the other side? Or like my case, in my quote unquote psychosis, how many of them are actually really living another life? This is why I'm one of the few people who, with the work we do with Iboga, will take on a case with someone with schizophrenia, because I don't think they're schizophrenic. What I think is happening is they're living a completely alternate reality. And what has to happen is the karma needs to be resolved in that life. And they need someone to be there and help guide them through that journey, just as a therapist would in this life, but basically a therapist for this alternate reality they're living in. And so that's sort of my approach on mental health. I know there are things that occur, and there are a lot of things that we can't quantify that are happening. And I'd be curious to see the statistics if we were to truly track that in some way.
It makes me think of the story that you shared in the book of the young therapist with his mentor, therapizing the woman with the black snake. And rather than go with her on this separate consciousness of this journey, of this dream of the snake suffocating her, he tried to bring her back to the consciousness of this plane, and then they lost the plot. Can you touch more on that? How when we try to make extra earth sense of symbols, how we lose the whole essence of it.
Yeah, yeah. So for context, if anyone's not hasn't read the book, this is a story from James Hillman, but a very long story short is there's a woman who's having a recurring dream of this snake that slithers through this grass field, wraps itself around her waist, and then lunges at her. And this is a reoccurring dream. So she goes into therapy. She sits down with a therapist, and they have this really beautiful um, time together where what they realize is that in this woman's life, her mother has never allowed her to sort of be herself, right? Like growing up, this mother made her dress a certain way. She had to be the captain of the cheerleading team. She had to date, the football player. Her mom dictated her whole life. And so, in Jungian terms, going back to Jung, what this therapist helped her realize was that the snake in this dream represents the devouring mother archetype, which makes absolute sense if you think about it. Like this represents your mother, and they even went over stuff like how to create boundaries for her. And the woman leaves the therapeutic session, and the doctor, or excuse me, the therapist is taking their post notes, and they turn over to the mentor, who's James Hillman. And James Hillman's not really paying attention. And so they finally go over and get his attention, and Hillman's sort of just like, oh, the session's over. Okay. And he's like, well, what'd you think? And Hillman doesn't say anything. And so he goes over his notes. And what James Hillman does is after the therapist is done talking and sharing all of these notes, he holds up a picture of the black snake. And what he says is, you lost the snake. And the therapist is like, no, no, we identified that the snake is representing the mother. And he says, no, what you identified was your education in Jungian archetypal psychology, your repressed sexuality, your abandonment wounds, your stuff with your mother, and you lost the snake. And so, what he's really saying is that when we enter the dream world, which is a place that many traditions go to for divinationary sake, when we enter the dream world, these images come to us. And what Hillman is saying is that once we analyze them, we've killed them. In other words, analysis kills imagination and creativity. Once you label something, you know what it is, so it's dead. What do you need it for? And what James Hillman is saying is don't lose the snake. That is an offering from the spiritual realm that you're being invited to bring with you into this life. Think about how magical that is if you don't kill it. To go into the dream world and have this snake come to you over and over. And what if you just carried the essence of that snake with you on your inner altar and you walked around with it every day without naming it? What if 2 months from now that woman sees a black snake crossing the street and she follows it and it takes her into a place and all of a sudden she meets the love of her life? Like the point is the dream world is inviting us to stay in the magic and the mystery, and analysis kills that. This is why in our retreats, when people ask me about a vision they had in Iboga and they say, what do I think about it? I won't even say anything. I'll just smile at them. Like literally, I won't say anything. And I'll encourage them not to. I'll say, keep it alive. Don't label it. And the real question is, how do you know that's what it meant? Like you can say you know, but how do you know it was the devouring mother? It sounds like it. But what if it's something else that happens years later? I'll share a little quick story. About 6 years ago, I worked with this woman, and she does this reading where she holds your head and she can see your guides and this whole thing. It's really beautiful. Her name's Elizbieta. She's out here in San Diego. And in one of these sessions with me, she saw this female energy that I was meant to meet. It was like a beautiful woman, and she described her as like a goddess-like figure. And when she asked the guides when I'm going to meet this person, they showed her a switchback mountain, right? Like, you drive up a car up a steep hill, you have to go up to the right, up to the left just to get up the mountain. They showed her this. And so she interpreted it as 3 years. And so now I'm thinking in my head, I'm going to meet this goddess like woman in 3 years. Mind you, I have a partner. So now I have to tell my partner, hey, by the way, I might meet this goddess like woman in 3 years. I don't know what's going to happen. And now she's freaking out about it, right? It's causing her stress and anxiety. Well, 3 years go by and I never meet that woman. So we're in Colombia after having our daughter, and I'm sitting at the table, and we're in a random Airbnb getting ready to move to another city to ready to go to Bogota. We just had our baby. She's about, 6 weeks old at the time. And I look outside and there's a switchback mountain right there. Yeah, I'm gonna start crying right now. And I look down and I have my daughter in the dresser drawer because I didn't want to put her in the crib or anywhere, like having her by me. And I'm like moving her back and forth. That was the woman. But because we analyzed it, we made this entire story up about it, which caused myself grief and worry, which caused my partner grief and worry that she's going to lose me at some point for years. And all I had to do was keep that alive.
Mm.
And thankfully, I did to a degree. And when I saw the Switchback Mountain, I remembered that time and I looked down, and there's my daughter. She's that goddess like figure I'm going to meet. And so that's why it's so important that we don't kill creativity. We don't analyze things. And that's what that book in its core is about. It's about living beyond the mind because the mind is an instrument of analysis. That's what it does. So it's not that we don't analyze, it's that we don't buy into the analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. I often will do esoteric acupuncture protocols, and during it I always tell people don't treat this like a Well, what I say is don't treat this like a mushrooms or ayahuasca experience. You're not going to see it like a movie. It's going to be like a memory and it's going to feel random. And I'm just tell me everything you see and I'm going to write it down. And we're just going to go with it. And years later, to this day, I still have people being like, Stephanie, that crab I saw, it makes sense now. I know what it means now. And it's always so fun to watch it unfold. And I mean, personally, I after years of doing psychic readings, I stopped trying to analyze it because I felt it was arrogant of me to tell them what I think it is for them. But now I'm just gonna take that and and remind myself with that rather than yeah try to tell myself like don't be arrogant. I'm gonna tell myself just don't lose the plot, don't lose the snake.
Yeah, there's a definition of mindfulness that I think sort of speaks to this. It says mindfulness is the awareness that comes from paying attention with intent in the present moment and from a place of non-judgment. And although the whole definition is beautiful, that last piece is the most important one because it doesn't mean you won't be judgmental. It means that you won't be judgmental of how freaking judgmental you actually are.
Don't judge the judge.
Basi. And so that's that meta awareness. And the same thing with analysis. Your mind is going to analyze everything. Just don't buy into the analysis. Understand that it's just analysis. It's fine. And don't believe it. That's why that Kalama Sutra is at the start of the book. Don't believe in anything is what it starts with.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's right. And I actually that was the last thing that you said at the end of our last podcast. So if anyone's listening and it's just like, who's this person? What are they, like? What are they talking about? You should listen to. It's almost like a part one to this conversation because you touch on your book a lot, and this is part two. We're gonna get deeper into it, and I really do want to keep the listener in mind because there's so much to this, and selfishly, I just want to go and keep going about, my experience with this book. But to bring a little more context for the listener, let's talk about the topic of this book, mind transcendence. Please define what that even is.
Yeah. So one way to say it is Patanjali, the teachers, the founder of yoga, essentially, he basically, Patanjali came along and said, okay, here are all these different limbs of yoga. I'm going to bring them under one sort of approach. And he wrote this book called the Yoga Sutras. Patanjali says that yoga is about the control of the modifications of the mind. And so the question then becomes, what is it that modifies the mind? And he says there's really five things called kleshas. The first one is ignorance. And the ignorance is the soil in which the other four grow. So what that means is like a tree, it can't grow without the soil. So if you can cure ignorance, the other four kleshas don't matter. They're cured. So the first one is ignorance. The second one is egoism. That's mistaking the self for the non-self. The third is attachment. We all know that one. The fourth is aversion. That one's very simple. And the last one is fear of death. So these are the five kleshas, these things that cause modifications to our mind stuff. And yoga is the restraint of these things that modify our minds. Mind transcendence is exactly that. It's a process of going beyond the mind stuff. They're very difficult to contain or to bring under control. Yoga teaches you how to do that. With all due respect, I never had enough patience for that. And so mind transcendence is a approach that I made on how to live beyond the mind. The same way we said, don't be judgmental of how judgmental you are. We can apply the same thing to this concept of mind transcendence. It's teaching you how to allow the mind to be what it is and how to exist beyond that.
When we mentioned the kleshas, there was one thing that you said about aversion that I feel like is really worth mentioning here because I think when things like neutrality, which we'll get into, as well as even karma, I think people they get angry. They're like, what do you mean that I have to be passive? What do you mean that like I deserve my karma? That th there's this label of, you get what you deserve, karma's a bitch, or you have to just do nothing. In order to be a spiritual person of peace, you just let abuse and things happen. So one of the quotes that you said that I wrote down is aversion is not the act of setting boundaries or seeking safety. It is the mental resistance and emotional turmoil we create in response to an experience. And this distinction is crucial. Can you touch a
Mhm.
little more on that? And then also talking about when you touched on the book, how neutrality is not tolerating abuse.
Yeah, yeah. And this spawned because at a retreat we were talking about this and a woman approached me and she was in a situation where she was being abused. And I was just speaking about this concept called the middle way. And I think it's important that we start there to get into this because we're speaking about neutrality. After the Buddha found his enlightenment, um, the first teaching he gave was on something called the middle way. So it sounds like it'd be a pretty important thing to understand why, right? And the best way to teach the middle way is, and I say this in the book, is to imagine yourself sitting in a room and I'm across from you, and I put on the table a rose that's dead and withered. And I would say to you, the reason that you see this as ugly or dead or whatever you want to call it is because something is off balance. You would intuitively understand what I mean. You would say, I get it. It's dying. It's off balance. And I would say, okay, perfect. And then I would get rid of that rose and I would put a rose that's brand new, alive and blooming and shining and all of these things. And I would say, the reason you see beauty, the reason you see this as alive and good is because something is off balance. And you'd be like, what? You just said the dead rose is off balance. Why are you saying that this beautiful live one is off balance? It doesn't make sense. But after contemplation, you would come to understand that according to the Buddha, both aliveness and death are both off balance. They're both just two sides of the same polarity. And it's that center point, the middle way, is the only place where liberation actually lies, right? That's where true freedom lies. That's where unconditional love lies. Unconditional love means it has no conditions. The only place to have no conditions is neutrality.
Mhm.
This is why so many people are so obsessed with trying to increase their vibration. I don't try to increase my vibration. I try to find neutrality in all things. Now, going to your question, how do you apply this to someone who's being abused? You can take this in a literal sense and say, okay, well, what you're saying is I'm being abused, so I should be neutral about it. No, what we're talking about neutrality is the mind stuff around the abuse, right? It doesn't mean you don't protect yourself. It doesn't mean you don't remove yourself from a harmful situation. But are you going to go home and dwell upon the abuse and beat yourself up and abuse yourself even more because you spent this much time with someone who was abusing you? That's where the neutrality comes in. It's liberation from the stuff around the mind. And when we touch it in this case, of course, we're not going to want to be abused. Nobody really wants to. Actually, some people do, and as actually, it's a fact. Some people are addicted to that type of stuff, and that's fine. But for the majority of people, nobody wants to be abused. There's a difference between taking something like aversion and trying to stick it onto everything, and the fact of course, we're not going to tolerate abuse. We remove ourselves from that, and the aversion comes from the mind stuff around it. I shouldn't have let him do this for so long. I'm so stupid. That's where the suffering lies. The abuse in the moment is a fact. There's going to be pain in that. There's nothing wrong with having pain. Pain is a natural response. If you put your hand by a flame, you're going to feel pain and it's going to cause you to move away from it. And now you have a learning experience. If someone's beating you physically or stealing from you, there's going to be pain. There's a learning experience there. But what happens after that? So that's where the real aversion and neutrality come in. It's about finding a neutrality with the event itself. It doesn't mean you stand there and keep getting abused. It just means that you have within your own self, you're able to stand there and observe it as a witness, free and neutral from the mind stuff that's going to happen around it.
It's it's so interesting since really practice. I mean, I started last year when we met, but now, and then after the retreat with you in Sedona, and then now reading this book, just feeling the expansion of awareness around the mind stuff when something happens. Uh, for example, today, somebody just kept on giving me nasty looks. And eventually I was a little bit like, the fuck is their problem? Why are they giving me? And then my mind, and then I had a moment of silence right before because after a while I was like, oh, I'm getting sick of the nasty looks. And then there was a moment of silence where there was nothing. There was nothing around the nasty looks and what they actually meant and what it meant for me. There was nothing. And then my mind went, and I listened and then I practiced the middle way, but I was like, I want to go back to that space right before I told the stories. And then also with that, watching other people in my life, how natural it is to go there, to make the stories. Talking about, what happened to me recently last year, in my relationship. I have so many people telling me all the time, don't don't think you're stupid, don't think this way, don't think that I'm like, I wasn't even thinking that. I wasn't even thinking that thing. And I have to really hold that space right before my mind goes, but that is a thought. Let's keep going with that thought. And just trying to stay in that space right before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that space is liberation,
Yeah.
right? That's literally it. Eckhart Tolle has this beautiful way of teaching that. What he says is that as he's lecturing, pay attention to the silence between the words I'm speaking. And he'll talk, but he's having you just hold the whole time pay attention to the pauses. And as you think about that, what's happening is someone's talking, and what do? We're like this, waiting for information. And then there's this pause and there's this stillness that's there. And then another word comes that we can hang on to. And so a beautiful way to practice that, exactly what you're talking about, is to do Eckhart's teaching is to, when people talk, listen to the space between the words. The same with music. If you have a music, there's little gaps you'll find where there's no sound. And in that gap, your mind will be still because it's hungry. It's like ever watching. Eckhart Tolle in his book, The Power of Now, I believe he says, be like a servant awaiting the return of his master. And what he's saying is you're constantly like waiting to hear, is the master home? Is the master home? And just to speak about this a little bit, what's beautiful about the work of Krishnamurti, if you read his books, I'll just say this, Krishnamurti is the deepest spiritual teacher I have ever read in terms of work. I've read a lot of stuff, and his is the deepest. And the reason why is because you're not going to find anything there. You read something or watch a video of his, and even though they have a title, The End of Fear. So you go in thinking he's going to teach me how to end fear, right? The problem is that what Krishnamurti's actually doing, and you can listen to his lectures and you'll see this, is he's never giving you anything. And so what happens is you're always waiting. There's like this yearning, this alertness that you always have, waiting for this teaching to come, but he never gives it to you. And after studying his work for about 3 years, I finally got it. I was like, oh, shoot. What his teaching is he's teaching me how to keep my mind in that state of spaciousness. That's the teaching. And if you listen to his work now, go ahead and watch it. You're going to be like, he didn't say anything. He didn't tell me how to end fear. And what you realize is he's teaching you how to remain in that spaciousness. And so, yeah, what you're talking about is a really deep and profound place. And that's exactly what the Buddha was talking about. That's the middle way. It's unconditional. That's why there's spaciousness. There's a word in the book I use. It's Nyanguthata. Do you know what that means? It was in the book.
Mhm.
Yeah. But someone listening right now doesn't. And so right when I say that, you're like, your brain has nothing to attach to. There's no memory to go in and attach to. So there's no thinking. And because there's no thinking, there's no time, right? If you really think about it, thinking, if you really think about it, you have memory. As memory moves across the mind, it's expressed as thought, right? So memory moves across the mind. We call that thinking. And then it's expressed as thought. So the movement of memory across the mind in itself implies a dimension of time. If there's no movement of memory, you have stillness. So if I say a word like Nyanguthata, what does it mean? You don't have any memory. Most people don't. You do now to go back and attach that to. So there's no movement of memory across the mind. Therefore, it's still, and therefore there's no time. And so you are right. This dimension is timeless and it's still because there's no movement of memory.
A funny anecdote on that is when I read that word, uh, and I stopped. My my mind was like, oh, that reminds me of like something like from like Black Panther, like some like Wakanda word. And then afterwards, and I read that, I was like, oh fuck, that was supposed to be a moment where I wasn't thinking. I was like, I was thinking about Black Panther.
Yeah, that's the mind. And for context, the word means I love you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk more about the middle way. I would love for you to, I mean, you can share the story that you told in the book, or you could share another story, but can you talk about the process of the middle way a little more?
Yeah. Are you talking about what I speak about in aspect two or like how to actually land there?
Yeah, yeah. Or is there more context from aspect one that you think we need before getting there?
No, and just for context for the listener, the way I wrote the book, it's in four aspects. And aspect means to look at. And so what we're doing in the book is we're looking at the title's Living Beyond the Mind, the End of Personal Suffering. We're looking at this topic, living beyond the mind, from four different dimensions. The same topic looked at from four different ways. The first one is theory and philosophy. That's aspect one. The second one is experiential in aspect two. The third one is from the perspective of sustained practice. So what happens if you keep living beyond the mind? What's going to happen to you? What are you going to notice? And the fourth one is what happens when you sustain it so long that it starts to become the way you are. And that's from this higher level of consciousness. And so in aspect two, we go into the experiential way. And to sort of explain it, what really happens when we have external stimulus is that our mind immediately tells us a story, right? And an example of the book I give is I was down in Hako Beach with my wife, and we were walking, and there was this guy that walked by, and he looked like someone out of an anatomy textbook. Like he had every single muscle. And my mind said to me, if you look like him, she would love you more. Speaking about my wife. Now, if I'm one of those childhood psychology people, these inner child people, what I'm going to do is go back to my freshman year of high school when I asked out Michonne Rogers. And I walked up to her in front of everybody and I asked her on a date. And she said in front of all these people, I don't date skinny dudes, and walked away. Right. And we could say that that was the source of this and go through a whole psychological thing about that. But what we're going to do in this case is just use the natural momentum presented here. So I see this man, my mind says that if you look like him, she'd love you more. And so I stop and I take a second and I ask, how does that feel? Right. And immediately it feels unworthy. But here's the thing, unworthiness really isn't a feeling. Unworthiness is a label of a sensation. It's something that we're using to try and describe a feeling. And this is where everyone gets caught up, is that someone asks, how do you feel? And you say, oh, I feel so sad. And you're never dealing with the sensation or the fact itself. You're dealing with the mind's label of the sensation or the fact itself. And that's not the same thing. That is like eating a lollipop with the wrapper on. You're defeating the purpose. The lollipop wrapper is designed to tell you what's inside. And your job is to take the wrapper off and eat it. So I have this thought, which produces a feeling, which my mind labels unworthiness. So I go beyond the label and I rest my awareness in the sensation itself. And according to David R. Hawkins and letting go the pathway of surrender, what he says is going to happen is you and that sensation are going to merge into one. Patanjali, by the way, also says the same thing, but that's a conversation for another time. So now I've merged with this thing, this sensation. And then what I do is I ask the mind another question. I say, okay, mind, what's the opposite of that story? Right? I mean, what is the opposite? The opposite is that my wife loves me for exactly who I am. And no matter how much more muscle mass I put on, she's still going to love me for who I am. How does that feel? Feels amazing. Well, amazing is just a way to describe a sensation. Go find that sensation. So I find it. I can feel my heart fluttering right now, which is just a label. There's a sensation there. And if I rest my awareness in that sensation, just like letting go says, chapter 2 of David R. Hawkins' book, the observer and the observed will become one. There's no more it and there's no more you. It's just one thing. So now I've dissolved that side. And then I'm going to ask the mind one more question. And that question is, which one is true? Is it true that my wife would love me more if I was more muscular? Or is it true that um, she loves me for who I am? And if my mind is conditioned to be optimistic, it's going to say that she loves you for who you are. If my mind is conditioned to be pessimistic, it's going to say, no, nope, 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 you need to get more muscle. And what my job is in that point is to teach the mind that neither are true, because she could love me forever for who I am, and she could wake up one day and 20 years from now and decide she wants to be with someone else. The choice is hers. And so the truth is that I don't know, actually. And so the question becomes, if I don't know, why am I attention to that first story the mind's telling me? And once you teach the mind, I don't know, you naturally fall into a place of the middle way. And so in the book, I teach this technique on how to give people a tangible tool to actually work with the mind stuff rather than trying to suppress it, rather than try to push it away or do something else about it. Why not just use its natural momentum to land us in a space of neutrality or the space of the middle way? And so that's what aspect 2 in the book is about. It teaches that technique in depth, and it asks the question, people want to know, how long does it take to master this? Because everyone wants to know how long. And my argument in the book is that the same amount of time it takes you to learn how to drive a car is the same amount of time you can teach your mind neutrality or to live in the middle way.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're my wife, she still can't drive.
Oh, don't call Joe out.
She's from New York, so it's fine. She has an excuse.
Um, One thing you forgot, a really important step there was the step of gratitude.
Yeah.
And yeah, but yeah, that's in between the questions. But shoot. Hold on. There was a few things that came up. Let me just listen. So one thing that I experienced with the state of neutrality is, and I understand this has to do with the kleshas, but say if because something that's really sort of similar, a story that my mind really gets into is like, feeling that unworthiness and telling myself stories about my friendships, relationships. And when I tell myself I don't, the truth is I don't know. And there is a sense of being really upset about that I have nothing to ride on. So right now what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, well, the truth is also the love and approval I seek through them, I can just find right inside. Would that be moving out of that neutral state though?
Well, the thing you have to remember is that if we have love and approval, we have hate and disapproval,
Mm.
right? And so remember, everything has a polarity. That's why the Hermetic principles in the book are written in. I share them because everything has its opposite, right? Like if you find a country that's in peace, it's because they were once a country in war. And so neutrality, again, is to be free of all conditioning. And that's why, in full transparency, love can be a trap. And we go that into the book because love is the same as hate. It's like anxiety and excitement are the same exact energy. It's just the mind story around that sensation is different. For the case of anxiety, we're anticipating something bad happening. For the case of excitement, we're anticipating something good happening. But it's the same fundamental energy within. And so when we're talking about neutrality, we're talking about becoming free of all thought. And when we teach the mind that neither are true and we leave it there, without adding anything else, what happens is the mind learns neutrality instead of duality. Love is duality. You cannot have love unless you have hate. And so, what the Buddha was really saying is it's not about love and it's not about hate. It's not about acceptance and it's not about rejection. It's not about hot. It's not about cold. It's not about right. It's not about wrong. All of those are the same thing. They're all off balance. And in a Western society, we're trained to have a mind in duality. The first thing we tell kids is, do you like that, sweetie? Does that taste good? And the kid says, no or yes. So we're conditioned from the start to choose right from wrong, good for bad. And so what we're doing in this technique at its core is trying to recondition the mind. And this is why I use the analogy of driving a car, because think about when you first got behind the steering wheel. You were probably behind the wheel like, oh my God. I know I was. I got a stick shift car and I honestly had to have my parents return it. Thankfully they could. I literally couldn't, I could not figure it out. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. And so there's a lot going on, but after a while, especially if you have stick, you're just doing it automatic, right? It's not, you don't have to think about it. Well, why? How does that happen? And the reason it happens is because our brains are learning instruments. And what happens is there's a part of your brain called the basal ganglia, and a complex task, which is normally on the outer cortex of the brain, consuming a large amount of processing power, gets compartmentalized down into the basal ganglia, and it becomes an automated response. And so this technique isn't about feeling better. It's about teaching the mind neutrality so that it begins to think in neutrality, which is not thinking. And when there's no thinking, there's no movement of memory across the mind. And when there's no movement of memory across the mind, there's stillness. And when there's stillness, there's no time. Yeah, this is why the power of now, this is really what Eckhart Tolle is getting into in the power of now. He's teaching you how to live in a timeless dimension. That's why now has no time.
This sort of makes me want to segue into my next question from that is the trap of optimism. We live
Yeah.
in a place where I hear it all the time. Oh, I just need to think more positive. You need to be more positive. Just be more optimistic and everything will be fine. It's never worked with me. I find optimism honestly a little bit irritating. So within this book with the neutrality, I really felt like, oh, finally, this this works for me. This, I mean, I'm still, working my way through it, but it feels so much more natural, honestly. So yeah, let's talk about the trap of optimism.
Yeah. Optimism, you know, it's an illusion, right? If like the other day we were coming back from Costa Rica, and I won't say what I had, but we're coming back from Costa Rica and we do what we do. And I got asked to go down into the secondary inspection place, right? And so the guy's like, "Yeah, I need you to come with me when I cross the border." And I'm like, "Oh shit, like what's gonna happen?" And so I go down, and my mind immediately says that there's something in your bag that you're gonna get in trouble about. That's called pessimism. Yeah. So I do the technique. I feel the feeling there. I ask myself, what's the opposite? The opposite is that there's nothing in your bag, that it's all fine. And you're going to just float right through. They just happen to do a random screening. And so I feel that technique. And then I ask the mind which one's true. And I don't know. Right. And so let's say I decide to be optimistic there. Yeah. Number one, I'm living in an illusion because I don't know that entire time. So you're not really seeing reality as it is. You're living in your artificial bubble. And number two, let's say something is in my bag. Now I knew it. I know I'm not this lucky. You have this whole story in order to spite spirit, spite universe, spite God, talk about how unlucky you are, whatever it might be. And so optimism is itself a true illusion. It's just a conditioning pattern of the mind. And so in that case, what I did was I found this place where I was able to just sit there and be curious about what's going to happen. And you know what it was? They wanted the fucking paperwork for my dog. That's it. They've never asked me to go down there for my dog. We fly in all the time, but they just wanted it this time. They didn't even check my bags. They just let me go. And so the point I'm getting at is, yeah, to be optimistic is obviously better than being pessimistic, but you're still living in an illusion.
Yeah.
And so my thing is I don't want to be an illusion. I want to see it all. I don't want to have horse blinders on. Optimism is a horse blinder life. It's great. You just see this great little story, and what about everything else outside of you? And so, yeah, just going back to the middle way, we have to be very careful about, um, yeah, allowing ourselves to get lost on one polarity because if you have optimism, you're going to have pessimism. It's no matter how much you tell people you're an optimistic or you tell yourself, you're going to be equally as pessimistic. The only difference between the two is one person says how often they're pessimistic, they speak about that more, and an optimistic person speaks about their optimism more. But they're both the same.
Yeah. It's funny because when I got to that part, there was some part in the book where something switched for me because practicing the middle way was really fun, actually. And it still is. It still is fun for me. Just questioning everything. But then I realized, I gotta practice the middle way on the positive things. So I just kept that in the back of my head. And then
See,
there was a moment where a friend expressed something that was so touching, and I felt so just special and loved within it. And then I was like, oh, this is my moment. This is where I have to practice the opposite and get into the middle way. And my mind was just like, are you kidding me? Really? You're gonna do this to us now? And the whole time I'm like, thank you for trusting me, mind. Thank you for trusting me, but it's so worth it. And it truly was worth it because it really is that moment of like, wow, I really am special. But you know what happens is in the middle of the night, I'll wake up and I'll feel a little uncomfortable. And then my mind will be like, oh, discomfort. Let's take that. Remember that special feeling you had earlier that day? Well, you were wrong. And
yeah.
it happened so often. And it was great because when I'm close to my period, I get a lot of insomnia, and so last night I had that, and I felt like my mind wanted to go there, but it had nothing to grasp on because I practiced the middle way on it.
See. And that's why I didn't mention gratitude in the way I shared it here. I talk about in the book because one of the highest frequencies you can actually find before really reaching neutrality is gratitude. And it's also off balance.
Mm.
And so when I do it myself, I don't use that gratitude technique, but it's important for people to know because it's a crucial step. If you're going to rewrite anything in the mind software, write gratitude. Dispenza says it best, gratitude is the ultimate state of receivership. But if you have gratitude, that means you're also going to find things not to be grateful for.
Mm.
And so a very wise person once said that next to unconditional love, gratitude is the next best frequency to hold. Yeah.
So then does this mean you're choosing unconditional love over gratitude? Or
No, you really can't choose unconditional love. You end up in it.
yeah,
It's a landing place, right? Like that's why enlightenment isn't something you can, it's not there's no action to take for enlightenment. It's actually inaction. In this case, is the total action.
gotcha.
Uh, and so just think about it like this, like when we have the observer and we have the observed, or in other words, we have the analyzer and the analyzed, right? Let's say it's fear. I am the analyzer and I have fear, which becomes the analyze. The problem is that I make this mistake that those two are different. And because I think they're different, I try to do something about that fear. And in that doing, I'm creating suffering in one way or another. But if you can realize that the analyzer and the analyzed are not different, that they're one and the same, this is why in that step, we put our awareness in the sensation beyond the label of the mind. And what happens is the analyzer and the analyzed, or the observer, the observed, become one. That's what we're doing there. We're merging artificial separate, becoming one. It's called unity. If I could realize that the analyzer and the analyzed are not separate from each other, there's no more action to take. And because there's no action to take, the way you can describe that is inaction, therefore is total action. And so enlightenment is inaction. When you're not doing anything, when there's no stillness of the mind, or just like you said a while ago, your mind was still, that's what enlightenment is. It's complete liberation of the mind. And it happens in flashes. That's why in Japanese Zen Buddhism, there's a word called satori for that. It's a moment of temporary enlightenment. It's a complete stillness. Yeah, this is why Iboga is such a powerful plant medicine because it suppresses your default mode network. And that day after, once you're out of the ceremony space and you're sitting out in nature, you're going to have a lot of moments of satori come up. There's going to be nothing, no thought. It's complete stillness, complete balance, and equanimity. That's why enlightenment is such an artificial fool's gold. People are out chasing it, but it's not, there's no action to take in enlightenment. So if you're taking any action, you're never going to find it because we have the analyzer and the analyzed. We have me and enlightenment. We think they're different things. And so we try to make a movement towards the other, but there is no other. So how the fuck are you going to find it? It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's why inaction is total action.
Hmm. The just in my mind when I think of someone really trying to find it, because there's people stuck in that loop. I just think of the term I heard on Instagram the other day, mental masturbation.
There you go.
It's
That's it.
yeah. Equanimity.
Yeah.
So a while back, not a while back, a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, I was listening to Ram Dass talk about one day he was in New Hampshire during the fall, and which is a quintessentially beautiful time in New Hampshire. And he stayed in a cabin and he refused to leave the cabin because he was in the practice of am I saying equanimity? Equanimity?
Equanimity. Yeah.
And somebody was saying to him, Ramdas, why don't you come out and see the beautiful world around you? You're missing it. You're missing autumn. It's not going to be here much longer. And he goes, no, I will not leave this room until I know when I look outside, I will not be taken back, taken away by the beauty of it.
Mm.
So I heard that and I really just didn't, it was a whole talk on equanimity and I really didn't understand it and it really stuck with me. And it wasn't until I was reading the book that I started to come to understand what he meant by that. I'm still digesting it a bit, so I don't know if I have much other words to say to it, but inside I understand. I do a lot more. Actually, this morning, every morning I look at, I'm like, wow. And and so I was just had that reminder of that story. And I was thinking, oh, what would it be like to wake up in my bedroom and be like, wow. Or to not even be like that, to just stay neutral. So on that grounds, can you please talk more on what equanimity means and I guess your experience on it?
Yeah. And, I think I haven't heard this Ram Dass thing, but there's something really special about that. So let me ask you this. Let's make it a little bit interactive. Have you had a medicine experience that you would say was just so magically beautiful?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, can you tell me a little bit about it? Just
I
I'm just
immediately
curious.
I think of Tepescoite.
Perfect. I mean, me too. Tepescoite is a perfect example.
Mm.
Tepescoite, by the way, for anyone listening, is what the Mayan people use. My wife carries that specific medicine, Joali. She sings during the ceremonies. It's incredible. So that Tepescoite moment, you're in this moment of beauty, right? Like the most beautiful, everything is beautiful, yeah? And what happens after that moment ends? It becomes what we call a memory. Yeah, like right now, it's a memory for you. And then what happens is we say, I want that again, right? I want to have that again. This is why if you look on people's resumes when they come to our retreats, there's like 50 Bufo ceremonies, right? It's like, what are you doing? And what's happening is they're really saying to themselves, I want that moment of beauty again. And so if you really think about it, and this will go into equanimity, they're no longer concerned with the beauty of that moment. What they're actually concerned with is the pursuit of pleasure. right? And so it's switched. And in that, the question becomes is why are we continuing to chase, right? Like, what is that about, right? If you're only concerned with the pursuit of pleasure, then what's happening is you're not seeing that that moment of beauty is gone forever. You can never have it again. And if you could see that truly, not just with your words and your intellect, but if you can see that that moment of beauty is gone forever, the chase ends. There's no more pursuing. And in that, you find equanimity. It's like if you are outside and a shooting star shoots across the sky. What happens? You're like, "Ah." There's this moment of beauty, of bliss. And you know there's nothing you can do about that. So you don't go chasing for another shooting star. You just rest in that moment. And then it's gone. Just like that. It happens very quick. Is why it's so special. The second that moment ends, what happens for a lot of people in life is they start chasing the next shooting star. And so
Yeah.
they've lost the essence, the moment of beauty, the moment's gone. Another way to describe this, to find equanimity, is I say this in the book, but when we lived in Costa Rica at this other place, these toucans would always land outside the window. And I would always be writing or reading, and I would see them there, and I would always watch them. There's always this pair of them, and they'd eat the fruits of the tree. And I remember the first time they landed, I said, Joe, I called my wife over. I said, Joe, I first saw them, and I was like, oh, there was a moment of beauty. There was no idea of a toucan. It was just like this wowness that took over me. And then I said, Joe, look, the toucans. And as soon as I said that, they were lost forever because I'm no longer dealing with the beauty of the moment. I'm dealing with what we call memory at this point, just like when we label an emotion. And memory is the past. At some point in my life, I saw a picture of a toucan and someone said, hey, this is a toucan. And I stuck that in my memory. And what I did right now is the beauty of the moment was there, and I labeled it, which is the past, which means I'm no longer in the present. I'm dealing with the past, and that moment of beauty is gone forever. That moment of beauty is equanimity.
Mm.
Equanimity is the moment where you realize that you can never have that again. And so that chase ends completely. Just like touching a flame. You touch a flame, you get burned one time really good. You're not going to touch the flame again. You know better. And so equanimity is the cessation of chasing, you could say. It's complete stillness.
I think about right before reading this book, I became just really, really aware of the whole concept of getting high versus getting free. Ram Dass talks about it a lot. And I realized how much I was looping through the getting high of everything and just thinking, I want to get free. And that's something I've been meaning to tell you really since I started this book is this book has really, really helped me move towards getting free versus getting high. And gosh, there's so much I could say about that, but I'll leave that there.
I just want to say one thing real quick. Um, you have to remember that we have cannabinoid receptors on the brain. And as much as people want to think that it's so that we can smoke weed, it's not. There's a molecule that you produce within your own self called anandamide. And in Sanskrit, ananda means bliss. And so when you find these moments of stillness, what happens is that molecule and anandamide is massively produced inside of the body and it binds to the cannabinoid receptors and you will get higher than you could ever fucking imagine. And in the book, I go into the different layers of samadhi, if you remember that part. And there's that one stage before the last, it's called Sa Ananda Samadhi. And in that stage, there's a blissfulness that takes over, and that's the reason why. So I just wanted to name that chasing a high doesn't have to happen externally. But when you stop chasing and you find that complete equanimity, that stillness, that's when this anandamide starts producing, and the high you will discover inside of that is like nothing else.
Yeah, I've been starting to experience it a few times, and it's like it's orgasmic.
It is. It's orgasmic. Yeah.
Keeps going and going. all day. The last thing I'd want to talk, oh God, there's so many things. Um, yeah. Well, I do want to talk about defining things, but before we get into that, I want to talk about parenting. Um,
Yeah.
you've touched on it a few times. I was reflecting on your dad now. Like we both changed so much since that last interview, and one of the big changes for you is you're a dad now, and you have so many exciting. Well, for me, it's exciting. Just the way you want to do it is so different, and you touch on that a few times in the book. And I love how you talk about the attachment styles because that was something that from the very moment I learned about it, I was like, I don't want to look too much into it because I don't want to get this more in my head. But it is pervasive. It is everywhere. And we've talked about this on the podcast a few times, but just talking about like the downfall, or not the downfall, the shortcomings of Western psychology within all of that. So yeah, because there is that one quote I told you about right before we started recording that the most important primary attachment relationship is between the parent and their very own soul. So I'm going to let you talk about that. I'm going to listen, but I'm going to let my mom's dog outside. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. Yeah, that one speaks really close to me now, especially now that I have a daughter. Um, Gabor Mate has done a tremendous amount of good uh, in our society nowadays. I mean, he's brought up some research and some topics that are just incredible. Um, he, you know, and there's some things that I've seen that are the byproduct of his sort of approach towards things that have caused a tremendous amount of hurt and suffering in our society as well. I cannot tell you how many parents come to see us, and the reason they come is because they feel guilty or shameful or whatever you want to call it about the stuff that's happening, the stuff that they did to their children to hurt their children. And one of the main quotes they'll say is a Gabor Mate quote where he says that if you don't get the primary attachment relationship right in the first 3 years of your child's life, that you're going to spend the rest of your life doing remedial parenting. That's a quote word for word. And you'll see this on all these Instagram pages with all these damn influencers sharing this quote, and they'll have a video of them playing with their kids. And what's really sad about that is if you really think about what that's doing, especially in modern day society, where there's more single mothers than ever, where households are broken, where there's financial issues, where people literally cannot afford to be around their children all day. They don't have the financial freedom to do that. You're setting the tone for something really destructive. And so, you asked about being a parent. The way I see this, and I'll come back to this Gabor thing in a second, is the way I see being a parent is imagine you're walking in like a middle of a market in like I don't know, like Egypt or somewhere, right? There's all these people and these vendors are selling things and this whole thing going on. And someone walks up to you and puts a seed in your hand and they close your hand and they walk away. You know that you have to plant that seed in the earth in order for it to grow. And so let's say you go do that. You plant it, you start watering it, you just take care of the soil around it, you make sure it has sunlight. You do all those things every day. And at some point, that seed is going to grow into whatever type of tree it is. You have no idea. It could be a Iboga tree and it could be a acorn and turn into a giant oak tree. You don't know. All you know is that that seed requires a certain set of conditions to be right in order to grow. For me, being a parent is that you've been given a seed, it has a blueprint inside of it for whatever it's meant to become. My daughter Zariah, she already has the whole blueprint inside of her. There's nothing that I can do to disrupt that blueprint. She's going to be what she's going to be. Now, if I'm beating her and doing things like that, of course it's going to have a detriment to that. But I'm willing to bet if I'm that type of person that she chose to manifest with as a child, that's part of her blueprint as well. And so going back to this attachment relationship, the thing is when we're taking care of the soil and watering the plant, that's not an action we take towards the seed. It's an action we take towards the soil. And that soil is our soul. And so all we have to do in our life is take care of our own soul as much as we can, stay connected to that. And from that overflow, your child will have all the necessary conditions met in his or her life. In other words, the primary attachment relationship, like you said from my book, has to be with your own soul. And from that abundance, your kid will have the parent it needs to fully flourish. There's nothing you're going to mess up. There's nothing you have to do with that child. It happens in the privacy of your own heart. Parenting does. And that's my biggest complaint with Gabor Mate is he's missing that. And because of that, he's striking literal fear into the hearts of so many parents who now are spending thousands of dollars to come to these retreats because they feel like they've messed up their kids. How do you mess up what's already written in the blueprint? You can't. It's an illusion. And James Hillman in his book, The Source Code, has a chapter called The Parental Fallacy. And I advise any parent to read that chapter. And he will dispel the myth that you can mess up your kids very quickly. And that has comes with it a tremendous amount of relief on ourselves. And so that's what I wrote about in the book. And um, for this little girl, I don't have a desire to educate her. I'm not going to tell her she has to go to school. I'm not going to tell her she has to learn how to write or to read. I'm going to let her live her life however she wants. Now, she's probably going to see something and say, "What's that?" And I'm going to say, "Well, you need to learn to read if you want to know what that means." And that might be in Mandarin, it might be in English. I don't know. But this is her life. And so for me as a parent, my job is just to take care of my own soul. And then from that, she will always have the conditions around her right. And if my wife does that and I do that, and I surround myself with a community of people who do that, that little girl's gonna, who knows what she'll become. But I can tell you right now, it's already written in that seed, just like inside of that giant oak tree outside your house or whatever trees outside your house came from a seed, and that whole blueprint was already in there. And so that's my whole approach on parenting now that I am a parent.
I want to finish that with a quote I really loved that you wrote. I think it was at a different point, but you wrote, in short, your responsibility lies not in controlling the child's future, but in living with alignment with your own inner truth. And I think it really simplifies what it means. I mean, I'm not a parent, I'm a child who's currently living at home with two other children. And yeah, it's that simple.
It really is, and I'm glad that, one thing I'm glad is I hope more people read this who aren't parents yet, because hopefully they can take this in and really understand that you don't have to place all this tremendous amount of pressure on yourself, right? Like if you're a single mom and you can't spend the time with your child that you feel you want to, I understand that's hard, and trust that soul chose you as its parent. It knew what your situation is. There's something it's meant to learn from that. And that's where we have to just accept that fact and have trust in that, right? If you want to have faith in that, something like that. Have faith in your child knows what he or she is doing. I think, when you were at the women's retreat, there was, a person there whose child committed suicide, right? And as you know, during the ceremony, she had a whole reconciliation conversation with her daughter. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was that, she had to trust and accept that her daughter, as hard as it was for her to hold as a parent, her daughter knew what she was doing, right? Like that still came in and chose to commit suicide. And now this mom is going through the world helping other children not do the same thing. That's called an angel. That's a messenger. That's a catalyst. That daughter acted like a catalyst to inspire that mom to fulfill her life's mission. And we have to trust our kids, trust the soul, trust the blueprint inside of them. And the way you can do that best is by tending to your own heart.
I see. All right. Last few closing question moments, unfortunately. Let's redefine a few things that you mentioned in the book. And let's start with compassion.
Oh, this word. Yeah, the definition of compassion is literally to suffer with. That's what it translates to. Go ahead and Google it yourself. And so, what I always tell people is I don't have any compassion. It's impossible actually for me to have compassion because I'm not going to suffer. If my partner is sad, for example, her nephew passed away a year ago. He had an overdose on fentanyl. She was devastated. Compassion means that I'm going to suffer with her. And what I'm wondering is why? What if I just decide to be with her? So when you ask me what's the definition of compassion, I'm going to tell you that the definition of compassion you're going to find is to suffer with, and that's what a lot of people are going to do. My invitation for you is not to have compassion in that sense, but to switch that definition around and just to be with another. You don't have to suffer to be with somebody through their suffering. You can do it as a liberated being, right? Suffering is optional. And so, how do I define compassion now? At the five sensory level, it means to suffer with. And at the multi-sensory level, at the level of someone who acknowledges the soul or a deeper existence in this life, whatever you want to call it, deeper presence, it means to be with. Simple as that.
Perfect. All right. Healing and trauma. Um, let's define healing.
I give this analogy the last time we talked, but it's important. I'll say it very quickly here. It's a mirror analogy, right? So the way a face sees the mirror, right? When you're looking in the mirror, you don't see yourself. You only ever see the reflection of yourself, right? So the seer, the true you can never see yourself. You only ever see the reflection. And so if you're brushing your teeth in the mirror and toothpaste splatters across the mirror, and this is actually how the book starts, as you know, what's going to happen is you're going to look in the mirror, you're going to see the toothpaste on the mirror, and you're going to think that the toothpaste is on your face. But because you have an intellect, you're going to say, wait, that's not on my face. That's only on the mirror. And so you're not worried about it. If you didn't have the intellect, you would start wiping your face off, check in the mirror, it would still be there. You'd wipe your face off again, you would check in the mirror, it'd still be there. And you do that over and over and over again for your entire freaking life. And after your entire life goes by, maybe then at the end you realize it was never on you, it was only ever on the mirror. That's what healing is. Healing is that. Now, can healing happen with like TBI, traumatic brain injury? Sure. We have a woman who just came on our in an interview, Jody. You know Jody. She's coming back, by the way. Jody healed TBI with Iboga. Your skin, a wound on your skin can heal. A broken bone can heal. You, the seer, can never heal. And so, what my definition of is healing is trying to wipe the toothpaste off of your face when it's not there.
Let's I don't think I was gonna say let's define suffering. I don't think suffering needs a definition. Do you?
I would just call it the number one addiction there is.
It really is. Let's define enlightenment.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I would say that enlightenment and unconditional love are the same thing. It's a state free of all polarities, free of duality, um, a place free of love, and a place free of hate. Um, and it's a place that requires no action, no steps to take to be there. And again, enlightenment is total inaction, is what I would say.
Hmm. It's like it makes me think of the no self, the Buddhist concept of the no self. Actually, that's
Yeah.
something before we close off, that is something I wanted to tell you was when I was reading that portion of it, because my spirituality was really based on, that whole story of the soul and a lot of people, there's just a lot of rhetoric around that. And I was waiting for that moment inside of me to reject that concept, that there is no soul. But it didn't happen. And as I read more and more about it, I realized because I knew it, I had experienced it in that last Iboga ceremony I did in Sedona. And when I asked to see my soul, expecting to see like this, whoa, like I don't know, like an avatar, cool light warrior thing, I saw all the empty space in between everything.
I see, man. I see to that. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say the analogy we talk about in the book is if you have a car and I were to remove the doors, you would still call it a car. If I remove the glass, you'd still call it a car. If I remove the tires, you'd probably still call it a car. If I keep removing parts, at some point you're going to stop calling it a car. That's the soul. It is a collection of subsequent parts that create what looks like a whole. But when you break those parts down, what you're really talking about is nothingness, no thing. And so the real question is, why are you choosing to pick just one point in an expanding, evolving realm of things to hang your entire hat on? If you hear to me today, I use the concept of the soul to help drive points and to explain things and to articulate. But in like you, in my own experience, there there isn't a permanent self. There's the illusion of it, right? You can think of it like that way. There, just like there might be a car, but at some point it's no longer a car. And so the point of the no self concept isn't to try to debate whether there's a soul or no soul. People get lost in that part of it because it's such a strong thing that people are polarized on. What it's actually about is this idea of stop believing in everything. You can still use a concept, but stop believing in everything because we don't know. Like we really don't know. The Egyptians didn't have an idea of the soul. There was the ka, there's this idea of something other, right? Even in Hinduism, there's the Atman. It's not called a soul. So the soul is just a friggin' word. But, nowadays, if someone says there's no soul, you're going to hear a whole debate start. But the point is, it's not about the debate. It's about the way your mind is, like what I was talking about with Krishnamurti. It's keeping your mind open, ready to receive, not ready to know. There's a difference there.
So we just redefine the soul, and that feels complete to me. Troy, is there anything else you feel that feels worth mentioning before we close out?
No, just, the book is, I understand that the concepts in the book are going to be pretty deep for some people. And so I just want to say in the back, you'll find a QR code. And my wife and I have pre-recorded and individual one-on-one programs we run for people who are trying to kind of go down this in a more direct path, you could say a more guided path. So just awareness that that's out there for you. And yeah, if there's one thing I would say about the book is in the beginning, there's that mirror analogy I gave. If you only read one part of the book, I would say just read that mirror analogy because as you see the cover, you're going to see a queen or a king of a chessboard looking into a mirror, seeing a pawn. And it's important to remember that the first step of awakening is to realize that that pawn in the mirror isn't the true us, right? That we really are this king. And then the second part is to realize that the mirror itself is the illusion, right? And that's why it's so important to realize what Socrates says, as for me, all I know is I know nothing. And if you can rest in the unknown, in the I don't know, and you climb down that ladder of knowing, you'll be in the place where true intelligence lies, right? True intelligence is moving from the unknown to the known. And so, in order to be intelligent truly, you have to be in the unknown, which is why Krishnamurti's teachings are always forcing us to remain there throughout his entire lecture. He has a book called Reflections of the Self. Good luck if you find any teachings in there. I couldn't. It's because the teaching itself is to be resting in the unknown, where true intelligence lies. And so, yeah, just if there's one thing I could say to take away from the book is that a mirror analogy is that thing. If you just meditate on that over and over again, it's going to unload so many layers for you. And so, yeah, that'd be my one invitation.
One of my favorite quotes in the book is "You are whole. We are whole and toothpaste free."
Yeah, it's such a silly analogy, but it makes so much sense.
It does.
Yeah,
Yay. Well, anyone who's listening wants to learn more about Troy, it'll be all in the show notes. And thank you. Thank you so much.
of course, my friend.
You made it to the other side of this episode. Congratulations. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to show your gratitude and find out how to support this podcast, the best thing you can do is leave your rating, leave a review, share with a friend, subscribe, all the things. And feel free to reach out. I have my information in the show notes as well. I love this stuff. I love talking about it. So if you want to continue the conversation, Instagram is probably the best way to do it. And that's it from me. You will be hearing from me in 2 weeks, and I'll be feeling your energy then.